A seemingly unremarkable game has appeared online, but some believe it hides a chilling secret that could lead to a logical resolution of its mystery. What secret did the developer leave in it? There are already several theories about this game. According to one of them, the characters are trapped in a kind of personal hell. Today I will show you materials that reveal how these characters underwent transformations. What this will lead to can be seen later. Part 1, Completely Ordinary. I would like to start my story with the first video dedicated to this lost game. It all begins with a character named Simon holding an ice cream cone. This character was enjoying a wonderful day. However, another character in the game wasn't as happy, and, to brighten his day, decided he also wanted to eat an ice cream cone. Approaching Simon, he took the ice cream from him, which would ultimately lead to a terrible end, but we're not there yet. After eating the cone, the character remarked that it was delicious. Simon, upset by this, stared at him. Naturally, Brood, the character who took the ice cream, began to justify his actions, saying he was hungry and couldn't resist such a treat. He then apologized, calling himself foolish. However, this marked a turning point in the story. A hint of madness began to show in Simon's eyes. Brood continued to try to reassure him, insisting they were still friends. Eventually, he offered Simon the leftovers of the ice cream. But by the end, Simon transformed into a monster and bit off a piece of what used to be his best friend's head. The next recording reveals how they change under external influences. From the very first seconds, there's text describing an infection that is spread across the entire globe, affecting a large portion of the population. Science and scientists themselves were unable to explain the origin of this phenomenon, nor do they understand what kind of disease it is. They then reveal the name of Patient Zero, who turns out to be Simon, and show an image documenting the stages of infection. It is clearly demonstrated that within 3 days, the infection can completely alter the structure of the original organism. Previously, we had already seen this subject feeding on another, and now, following this illustrative image of the infection stages, it is mentioned that one of the scientists, or perhaps one of the survivors, has already been consumed by it. Shortly after, a recording begins, showing a forest scene. The operator appears to be fleeing from an unknown threat. At one point, the message, "You cannot escape, Brood," is heard. After these words, the footage shifts to a character holding a flashlight. It seems the earlier scenes were shown from his perspective. Returning to the present moment, we see a dialogue between this character and the creature that was once Simon. The protagonist accuses Simon of becoming a monster under the influence of the virus. However, Simon denies this, claiming it is not a disease but a gift, one that not everyone is worthy of receiving, and that he is no monster. The scene then reveals Simon appearing behind the protagonist, making it clear that survival is no longer an option for him. The sequence ends with Simon's voice apologizing as he explains that he simply wanted to eat. Part 2, The Infection. The second recording begins with the activation of the tape, accompanied by text at the bottom stating that this pathogen cannot be stopped. It appears that Wenda, one of their group members, became infected. The creator of the recordings is terrified, as the infected Wenda killed 3 others, referred to as Sprunki, using only a kitchen knife. Sprunki, seemingly a victim of the incident with Wenda, is shown in the footage alongside photos of the others involved, labeled with their names. The first victim was Oren, followed by Tunner, and the last on the list was Garnold. Additional text describes a specific moment during the incident. Tunner attempted to protect everyone, but Wenda, still conscious despite the virus's effects, used a gun to shoot him in the head. His lifeless body fell to the ground without any signs of life. After this, Lime became extremely shaken by the events, leading to long-lasting trauma. The narrative continues, seemingly shifting to Owax, who was even more deeply affected. As everyone around him perished, Owax locked himself inside a house. The text ends here, transitioning to footage of this character. He stands alone in an empty room with the camera slowly zooming in. His face reflects fear and anxiety. A creaking door causes him to turn his head, and there stands a red-colored figure resembling him. Lime's pupils dilate, and a blackness overtakes his eyes entirely. The next scene shows this same character wandering through the location, breathing heavily, suggesting he was running from something. Like many others, Lime had succumbed to the infection. The final shots reveal how he killed one of his companions, leaving no doubt about the horrors unleashed by the disease. Wenda hit Pinky with a brick. Pinky wasn't sure if she had been infected or not, but her hopes weren't entirely extinguished. After this narration, footage appears, showing Pinky in a severely weakened state wandering through the forest. Ahead, she notices Wenda, who had struck her with the brick, completely tearing off her face in the process. Determined to track Wenda, Pinky sets out on a perilous search, a decision she will come to regret. The next recording begins in the forest. The protagonist searches for Pinky using a flashlight to light the way. Along the path, they encounter a transformed member of the group, Sprunki. In a panic, they stumble into a tree, dropping the camera to the ground. The accompanying text describes how the protagonist initially hides in the grass to evade the monstrous figure, but they can no longer continue their video diary. Toward the end of the recording, a horrifying scene is shown. Ratty hanging from a rope, his lower body entirely missing. As for Lime, after all the atrocities he committed, he contemplates ending his own life. Yet, for some unknown reason, he hasn't done so. This marks the end of the recording. Part 3. The changes reach their peak. This time, the final recording from the research center focuses on Brood, who is under observation by medical staff and scientists. One of the scientists remarks on the peculiar state of the bodies, which over time have undergone negative transformations. He admits he doesn't know what to make of the situation. The narrator explains that Simon, Brood's friend, had been acting strangely lately. Just a week ago, he seemed entirely normal, though visibly ill. Over time, Simon's condition worsened, and his jaw began to enlarge unnaturally. Due to these grotesque changes, Simon locked himself inside his house. What happened to him afterward remains a mystery, but Brood is deeply worried about his friend. As a loyal companion, Brood decides to visit Simon at his home to offer help. As Brood approaches the house, he describes the area as unsettling. Many things in the vicinity seemed off, but he couldn't pinpoint why. Perhaps the darkness and Simon's destructive rampage during his transformation had left the surroundings in disarray. Regardless, Brood presses on, calling out for anyone, though the dark and eerie atmosphere causes his imagination to conjure frightening images. Brood resolves to stay focused on helping Simon and continues his journey. Eventually, Brood reaches Simon's house. Standing at the door, he expresses his concern, knocks, and finds the door creaking open into complete darkness. Brood steps inside and calls out to Simon, urging him to come forward. He understands that Simon is in terrible shape and is experiencing something horrific, but Brood is determined to help and ease his suffering. Unbeknownst to him, Simon is already standing behind him. When Brood turns around, he asks Simon what happened to him. Simon simply responds, "You are my friend," before the scene cuts to him biting off a piece of Brood's head. The recording ends here. Conclusion. Today, we explored an analog horror inspired by Sprunki. Despite its bizarre nature, the game incorporated music and eventually introduced a dark, alternate world. In this world, the characters had either suffered significant trauma or transformed into monstrous versions of themselves. The game also added unsettling elements such as posters of a missing girl, deepening the eerie atmosphere.